organized by GAMAC in association with the Liberation War Museum as part of the 5th International Conference on Bangladesh Genocide and Justice. The theme of the roundtable session is how can dealing with the past contribute to preventing the recurrence of atrocities? What can and should we do? This is a very pertinent global issue, and the roundtable is also being live streamed globally. And with this word, I give the floor to Dr. Helen Jervis, advisor to the Extraordinary Chamber in the Court of Cambodia and a very renowned genocide scholar and activist, and she will be the moderator of the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Mofid al-Haq, one of the trustees of the Liberation War Museum, hosting us here today. I am happy to be asked to moderate this session, introduce the speakers, and also facilitate comment and discussion from the floor. And also from our participant, who is she visible on the screen? They're from Switzerland. We are, this is, as Mofidal said, it's a joint session. And we, on the program was, we were hoping to have Mo Blika speaking, but she will be, I'm sure, ably represented by Sabrina Buchler, who is a member of the steering committee of GAMAC, the Global Alliance Against Mass Atrocity Crimes. And she's also a program officer for the task force for dealing with the past and prevention of atrocities from the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Sabrina. Can you hear us?
I can hear you wonderfully well.
Oh, now we can see you. Good. Hello.
Hello.
And welcome.
Good afternoon.
We also have on the panel, we have 3 other speakers here with us today in Dhaka. Mr. Chai Visot from Cambodia, Professor Alex Hinton from Rutgers University, and Mr. Hafid Abbas from the National Commission on Human Rights from Indonesia. So we've got voices from different countries, and these people have been participating in the 3-day conference on genocide and justice. So it's very welcome to conclude our conference with this joint session. So I believe, Sabrina, you're listed as the first person on the program to speak. Are you willing to kick it off?
Absolutely, I'm ready. Thank you so much, Helen, for introducing me. I'm sorry that we cannot be physically with all of you in Dhaka right now, and that we missed the certainly extremely interesting first 2 days of the conference. So, as you already mentioned, I am part of GAMAC's, the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes steering group. That's a steering group composed of a certain number of states and civil society organizations, academic institutions. And I'm now delivering these remarks here today on behalf of Mo Blika, who is actually the chairperson of GAMAC right now, and who is also my boss as a special envoy for dealing with the past and prevention of atrocity in the Swiss Foreign Ministry. She's flying right now to Ecuador, and she's really physically in the plane, and that was a last-minute urgent decision, and that's why she couldn't make it today. So I would just say a couple of words about about the global action against mass atrocity crimes, because I don't know how familiar the audience is with this initiative. But basically, it's a group of countries and, as I said, non-governmental and academic institutions, together with the Office of the Special Advisors for Prevention of Genocide and the Responsibility to Protect of the United Nations, who got together first in 2013 to try to build an alliance to contribute preventing mass atrocity crimes. And the idea is to do this by working with states on the national level, on the national dimension. So GAMAC seeks to build and strengthen capacities and strives at helping states to develop and implement national preventive strategies, structures, architectures, etc. It basically aims at being a platform for exchange, dialogue, dissemination of learning and good practice, as well as lessons learned when it comes to prevention. And actually, the Liberation War Museum, who is organizing this conference these days, recently joined GAMAC as a partner, and we're extremely pleased about this recent development. So to come to the core of the discussion, we believe that a crucial issue in contexts that deal with a legacy of atrocity is recurring such atrocities from reoccurring, preventing such atrocities from reoccurring again. And it is our deep belief that you do not only need to address violations committed, but also the culture that allowed the commission of such atrocities and the system that either actively contributed to the atrocities being committed or let them happen by negligence. Because when atrocities happened, the government, which bears the primary responsibilities for preventing them, either did not have the capacity or did not have the willingness to actually prevent what happened from happening. And that's the crucial element which we believe must be addressed. The aim here is to establish a system where governments cannot find themselves in a situation of being unwilling or unable to prevent crimes from being committed. And that's the idea behind GAMAC, to contribute to help building such a system. And I mean, from a more Swiss perspective now, when we are in a position of supporting states, of facilitating work in the field of dealing with the past, we often work with a diagram. And I would now like you to, I mean, I sent this diagram, maybe you can project it. We find it useful actually for pedagogic purposes, and maybe also for this presentation here. I don't know, is it possible to project the diagram, or otherwise I will try to describe it without.
Did you send it already, or yes?
Yes, it was sent a couple of, but I can send it again if it's helpful.
Can our technical staff please arrange the projection?
Voila, there it is. I briefly saw it.
Coming up?
Yes.
Okay.
So, just very briefly, well, what we see is that victims at the very center, victims of atrocity are the core subject of this diagram, and their interaction with perpetrators of atrocity is a crucial element. That's the very central circle of the diagram. But in fact, we do not need to intend victims and perpetrators as individuals, but rather also think in larger institutional terms, because both, I mean, institutions can also be either victims or perpetrators or a combination thereof. And when we go from the very inside circle to the outer circle, you have to think that citizens are subject of rights and that states are bearers of duties and responsibilities. And basically, what we think of is a constant interaction and negotiation between the citizens as bearer of rights and the states as holders of responsibilities to better fulfill, for states to better fulfill their responsibilities and their duties. In terms of transitional justice, or dealing with the past as we call it, we think in 4 dimensions. One of them being the right to know, another one being the right to reparation, a third one being the right to justice, and last but not least, we talk about guarantees of non-recurrence. So, for example, when we speak about right to know and initiatives in these areas, like such as truth commissions, etc., then we have always this dichotomy between the victims and the perpetrators. On one hand, we have the right to know of the victims and the people in general, and the duty to give access of information on the side of the state. So we consider that, for instance, an initiative like the Liberation War Museum is actually a step towards fulfilling this duty of information which a state has, together with initiatives in the area of education, etc. When we talk about reparations, and there is a list of measures in this diagram which I mean are part of what is considered reparation, we very often think a lot about the material dimension of reparations, but there again, from an idea, from a preventive perspective, we believe that this focus on the material side and of the strict reparations of just the victims and not considering the question of reparations in terms of society at large makes it transitory and sometimes also unsatisfactory. And so many elements of reparations can in many ways be integrated in the ongoing agenda of a nation. For instance, when we talk about measures, development measures for particularly affected communities, etc. And well, then down in the left, on the left bottom of this diagram, you have the justice. And often when you speak about transitional justice, in many instances, it's actually reduced to justice. And this primacy given to justice, in our experiences, it gives rise to a lot of frustration, because from the perspective of victims especially, it's extremely difficult to cope with the fact that fair justice or fair trials need a long, long time to happen. And when there is, well, insatisfaction remaining, even there, we think that although this is classically called differently, but we believe that administrative justice measures, including, for example, vetting in all institutions which may have been involved somehow in the commission of crimes, is important, extremely important for preventive purposes, including, yes, in terms of signaling deterrence and obtaining deterrence. We think that in general, too often, transitional justice, or dealing with the past as we call it, has been used as a goal in itself. But in fact, it's not. It's a means to an end, and the goal and the result should be dismantling what in society and in a system has made it possible or has contributed to atrocities being committed at the institutional and at the cultural level, as I mentioned early on. We need to ask ourselves questions like, do we have laws against discrimination of minority groups? Do we have new history books presenting different narratives? Do we have a new strategy for security forces? How is, for instance, our police composed in multi-ethnical societies? How do we handle in general our cultural or political minorities? These are the sort of questions that make it that we find this diagram useful. What will help preventing recurrence is not a single measure, but a wise combination of different measures, depending on the context. And there are universal norms and standards, and we all have to work in our societies to reach them. Sometimes we think that the work done is done, but in fact we realize that we have to start all over again. And this may be the case in Europe these days, where many young people have never experienced a painful past because it's so past that they start to forget and no longer to know. And maybe then it's more important than ever to be alert and think of prevention everywhere, even where the risks are not immediate. So these are the messages that I wanted to convey to you today, and I now look forward to hearing the others and to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sabrina. Thank you for that introduction to the framework with which GAMAC is using in this work. And thank you for bearing with being at the end of the video feed and not with us here today. So I'd like to turn now to the panel that we have lined up here waiting. And first I'd like to introduce Mr. Chai Visot. I don't know if you've met him before, but he is the director of Tuoslang Genocide Museum in Cambodia, somebody I work very closely with, sometimes on a daily basis. And it's his first time to come to the Liberation War Museum, and I'm sure he's found it a very useful few days. And so he's going to talk to us about the experiences that he's had and that we've had in Cambodia in the question of dealing with the past for atrocity prevention. So over to you, Visot.
Thank you so much for the introduction from Dr. Helen Jarvis. Actually, I don't have much to share for the discussion, but because in Cambodian context it's not really different from Bangladesh situation, as the government did all the best in order to stop the genocide or atrocity happening in Cambodia. But actually, based on my observation, we have seen three main, or actually four, but I just want to introduce three first. It really fit to the context that Judge Kolas has raised yesterday regarding to the truth, memory, and justice. Actually, since the liberation in 1979, the government of Cambodia, in order to show the truth, to among the rest of the Cambodian people who survived from that regimes, in order seeking for the support from UN or from the world, they try to create we call a genocide team, which is based in Tuoslang, based in my museum. And this team worked closely with in the support of the Vietnamese journalists we call experts that help us to document some numbers, amount of Cambodian who were killed in different provinces in Cambodia. We try to seek document all of those numbers in order to use as a document for justice. And then at the moment, not only Cambodian government. Recently we have many NGOs, especially since the establishment of the tribunal in Cambodia in 2006. So many NGOs are working to collect different information, especially for oral history. If I'm not wrong, TCCAM is one of the biggest document center of Cambodian. Is the leading NGO, most leading NGO in Cambodian that have done, I can say thousands of oral histories all over the countries. This is a very important process. And right now, our museum, the museum ourselves, we also continue this task. We just start, to collect some oral history to keep, because this is very important to tell that for younger generation of Cambodian or other researchers about the truth that what happened in Cambodia. And then sometimes for us, we have a different perspective while we are collecting the oral history. We have used that for the temporary exhibition because we really want to let the local and especially international visitor come to the museums, about 45,000 each year, to learn about to learn about the truth that happened, what happened, atrocity that happened in Cambodia. And also the second point regarding to the memory. Of course, since the collapse of the Khmer Rule, Cambodian government immediately, create a small memorial in each province, and then especially in the Buddhist monastery. But if the government of each province, they find many remains, skeletons, they're going to build what we call a stupa, and then keep all that bones as a memorial to those who pass away through that regime. But mostly only stored in the Buddhist monastery. That's the very best place for memorial for those who pass away, linked to the religious concept. And then the government just announced to choose 20 of May is, I don't know, Helen, we call the Memorial Days, actually. But we have our local term, but after discussion, we should not use translation. So that's why we call Memorial Day, 20 of May. And we always celebrate that since the collapse of Khmer Rule up to now, just a few days ago, yes, we did that. Yesterday, actually. Yesterday, we still do that. And especially in Phnom Penh, at Killing Field, the biggest ceremony, for 20 of May. But for ourselves, as a museum, since actually the 20 of May is in Phnom Penh, before they celebrate in my museum, but later on they celebrate in the Killing Field, about 15 kilometers from my museum. And then they stopped many years. Just recently that when I was appointed to be the director, I decided to do this. And this plainly not related to the other concept of, a political issue, but we just think about the memory, plainly about memory. We just invite the monk, for blessing to the soul of the rest who were executed through this prison. Commonly we do that. I have done that 3 years already. And this is a part of one of the effort of the government and also my museum are doing for the memory. And government also encourage other provinces to celebrate the 20th of May too. It still existed in Cambodian society right now. And regarding to the justice, yes, just several months later, I mean in August, because of the collapse in January, and then we start the court in August, the first court that Dr. Helen Jervis has raised during her presentation yesterday. Cambodian government try all the best, to condemn, to sentence the top leaders of the Khmer Rouge. I think it's almost the same when we are talking with Dr. Alex. We did almost the same for the top senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge. So for almost 40 years ago, we did that, I think. And then another task, because what the government were doing after the collapse of Khmer Rouge were not approved or not recognized by UN or by the world, and that's why the government tried their best in order to seek the support, the recognition from UN levels. As a result, after the unification of the, in the country in 2008, in 1998, and then in 2006. A hybrid court has established for seeking justice to those who pass away, but only, like you said, only the senior top leaders of the Khmer Rouge. All of these activities that we are doing is only for seeking the recognition of the crimes, that happened in Cambodia, to seek for justice. And then order as a good example and to stop these kinds of crimes or genocide happening in Cambodia and also the world. But the last point that added to the truth, memory, and justice, I think peace is very important. Is very important. Without peace, without the strong effort from Cambodian government through the win-win policies, no doubt that we can do something that as a big gift to to stop the suffering of the rest of the Cambodian people, or survivor Cambodian people. If without peace, no way that we can do everything, like as a compensation for what they have lost, during the Khmer Rouge time. So, in short, I think this is what my government and also some activity that NGO or my museum ourselves have done in order to stop these kinds of atrocity happening in Cambodian society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Visot. And I think just one point I would add is the linking of what has been happening with the justice process in the ECCC is the reparations program, and that links back into memory too, because we have been building some memorials and education in the school curriculum, and also artistic performances and assistance, direct psychological help for victims, and ceremonies of remembrance. So also on that point, I think the 20th of May is going to be gazetted as a national holiday, which was an order from or reparations project agreed to through the court, and the government has agreed to that. So probably next year it will be indeed a national day. So we can move on. I think unless people have a very specific question, I think we'd better hear from everybody first. And we're very pleased to have with us a commissioner from the Indonesian National Human Rights Commission, Komnas HAM, with us today. And he's going to speak about a specific aspect of Indonesian history and what happened there with regard to dealing with the past. So can I hand the microphone over to you, Hafi? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Helen, Mafidul Haq, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a big honor and pleasure for me to share Indonesian experience in the contemporary history of New Indonesia to address the past gross human rights violation in the country. Indonesia indeed is a quite large territory. We have 2 million square kilometers of land, but our sea is 6.2 million square kilometers. So the size altogether is 8.2 million square kilometers, or twice much larger territory as compared to European Union after British exit. We have also quite large number of population. We are now having 260 million people living across 17,000 islands in the Equator. So we have a very long authoritarian regime for 32 years and the Suharto administration. And shortly after having the currency crisis in Thailand in 1997, that affected the region, Indonesia was suffered most. So at that time, our economic growth was minus 16%. So we almost collapsed as a nation. We almost disintegrated. We have a very difficult time 19 years or 18 years ago. So to survive, Indonesia changed their approach to address this contemporary reality. We changed our approach from authoritarian or militaristic system to democracy. It's a shock for the nations because 32 years we are familiar with conformity, with centralized system. We changed our approach from Jakarta center policy to the centralized policy, to 72,000 villages, to 500 district municipalities. We decentralized the system. That's a matter to survive. We changed our system from a very closed system, but we promote a freedom of expression, freedom of media. And also we promote the supremacy of law from domination of politics. Just most recently, if you read the latest publication of Indonesian law at the moment, we have sentenced some 70 ministers and one chief of constitutional court just a few months back has been sentenced to life sentence. So no impunity at the moment for Indonesia. Supremacy law is a matter of life and death for the nations. So to address those human rights issues in the past, we have 3 scenarios. One is if those cases, especially mass atrocity, if those happen before the year 2000, we proceeded through the ad hoc Human Rights Tribunal. We have Human Rights Court law in the year 2000. But if those cases happen, took place after the year 2000, we proceeded to the regular Human Rights Court. We have 4 at the moment in Indonesia. We have Jakarta, we have in Makassar for eastern part of the country, in Medan covering Aceh, and we have also in Surabaya to address Java and Papua. So back to this situation, we have a few examples that how we address the past. We have Aceh tragedies, that we have great gross human right violation over there. We have military operation because the separatist movement in Aceh took place for 30 years. And every single day, we lost at least 5 to 6 lives for 30 years. And Aceh was a very difficult time because they suffer a lot from military operation. They're very poor, they're very weak. But all of a sudden, they suffer from tsunami in December 26, 2004. And just within a few minutes, Aceh lost 220,000 lives in a few minutes. They lost economic infrastructure, 80%. They lost their land, 3,000 hectares, lost forever. There is no hope for Aceh. But on that critical moment, so we find solutions. We address the past in a very difficult time for Aceh through Helsinki Peace Accord. We sit together, we discuss the modality to address the traumatized situations. We have at that time about 600,000 internally displaced persons. We have, well, totally damaged situation, very frustrating. But we sit together in a peaceful dialogue. We make it in Helsinki. We adopted Helsinki Peace Accord on 15 August 2005. And luckily, so after 12 years at the moment, we could save 21,800 lives. And Aceh now is one of strong economic power in the east-western part of Indonesia. Because no more tensions. They enjoy freedom. They enjoy supremacy of law. But we provided spatial autonomy to Aceh. They established local truth commission and reconciliation. But those cases that took place after the year 2000, we proceeded to the regular human code. So hopefully that this experience, that could be a good lesson learned, not only for Indonesia, but for the region and for the world, that in just difficult time, again, we could find a solution for the common dignity of Aceh and Indonesia. So that's my reflection a little bit for this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for that example from Indonesia. Thank you. And now, Professor Alex Hinton from Rutgers University in New Jersey in the USA, former president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars and regular visitor to Cambodia, and here with us in Bangladesh.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and Mr. Ark again for hosting us here at this forum. And again, thanks to our audience for bearing with us through very sustained, intense discussion so far. We're just supposed to speak very briefly for 5 or 6 minutes, so I'm going to be short. So my charge, I've got 7 minutes. I'm excited now. That's good. All sorts of possibilities are opening up before me. I've got to consider that. Don't get worried. Anyway, so my charge was to talk about human rights in relationship to dealing with the past and genocide and mass atrocity prevention. Now, our colleague at the beginning went over a lot of that territory. So the good thing for me is I can quickly summarize a couple key points and then move to what I really want to get into. So sort of the gist of my comments come down to exploring something I've talked about earlier in the conference, sort of bringing a critical lens to the study of genocide, So first I talked about critical genocide studies, and then another presentation, critical transitional justice studies. And so you can guess what I'm going to propose, critical genocide prevention. So again, to think about that. And I mean that in two senses. The first sense is it's absolutely urgent, critical issue that needs to be dealt with. You know, genocide's unfolding, but you also have longer-term issues to consider. So the human rights infrastructures have been touched upon already in the initial presentation. You know, international human rights and humanitarian law. So we have a body of law that's in place to protect people. We have a number of institutions that exist, ranging from commissions, human rights commissions, different courts, the United Nations itself, and you have a number of networks ranging from international human rights networks to this coalition itself would fall within that rubric. You also have different national, local initiatives in this regard. So at this point, there's a very expansive infrastructure that in one way or the other is devoted to genocide, mass atrocity prevention, often now under the rubric as well, and is joined with R2P. And as an example of that, at the UN, there's a special advisor to the UN Secretary General on genocide prevention that was then conjoined with the R2P office. And, you know, that's some... I'm headed towards R2P, so I will get there. That's in the second part. So the responsibility to protect, which is an initiative that different people claim sort of to have coined the idea of, I think Francis Ding's the one who did, but it devolves a responsibility, seemingly, at least I should add, from something that's the onus of the international community and thereby might legitimate interventions to say this is a responsibility for the national, for the country in question, and only as a last resort will the international community intervene, and I will come back to that point. Before doing so, I want to talk about, in terms of dealing with the past, at this conference we've talked about transitional justice, but really in terms of sort of human rights, rule of law discourses, transitional justice has been in the forefront of these. And again, I know not everyone is familiar with transitional justice. It has a complicated history. You know, it goes back to, you could say, to modernization theory, all the way back to the Enlightenment, with notions of progress, notions of teleological change. Marxism is one example of a framework. But really, the term was coined in the late 1980s, early 1990s, but is very much linked to and defined as, initially, though it's not by many places now, to the sort of teleological transformation from a authoritarian regime to a democracy, often with sort of the implicit assumption that would be a liberal democratic democracy that would engage in market exchange. And those assumptions, I think, are there, and there are different modalities that come under this umbrella. Justice, as the word says, in the sense that people think of it as international courts, hybrid courts, and different local justice initiatives as well. It also encompasses truth and reconciliation commissions, educational initiatives, memorialization, as we just discussed, lustration programs, and different things. There are many. It seems like there's always more and more that's coming under this expansive umbrella. So within this, there's also the right to know, you know, the right to truth as well, which came out of I believe the genealogy goes back to the Argentinian experience, and there's now a day that sort of recognizes the right to truth, the right to know. So really, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. But at the moment, they're, you know, sort of shifting to the second part of critical prevention studies I want to talk about, is the need not to just take at face value the discourses of genocide prevention. A very effective genocide prevention will be one that critically interrogates its own assumptions. And I want to just give you a few examples of this. So for example, the notion of critique is the notion of distinguishing and trying to unpack the complexities of something. I'll give you, we were supposed to talk about experiences. I could talk about a number in the United States, but maybe I'll just refer quickly to a conference I went to in Australia, and there was a mapping of genocide hotspots. And Suddenly, Iraq came up. This was, I'm not going to tell you, you'll start to figure out, how old is he? And then I don't necessarily want to go there. But at the time, conflict was going on in the mid-2000s to late 2000s at this point, and it coded red, effectively. And the question I brought up was, well, when you code a country red, you have a genocide alert for a specific locality, it erases the geopolitical complexities. It erases the historical complexities. And this is a larger problem of trying to think of genocide prevention in terms of place, because the discourses of a set of knowledge like genocide prevention can define domains. Even earlier when we had invocations, the notion of local culture, right, fixes the problem. And we want to make sure that we keep our eye on geopolitical complexities and also the erasure of complicities as well, which are often at the forefront. So that's one quick example. R2P itself, as I said before, as a discourse has many good things about it. It's been used, but it also has been used in the case of Libya, for example, as a justification, a discourse that was used to legitimate action and intervention. Whether or not that was the correct choice is something that all of us can decide on our own, but there's no doubt that it was used as a discourse and not exactly in the way that it was conceptualized as. At the conference we've talked before in terms of discourses that produce knowledge, the notion of what a genocide is, which cases are paid attention to, which are not, what I referred to earlier as hidden genocides or forgotten genocides. Why is it that we pay attention to certain cases and not others? And those aren't necessarily benign reasons why that's so. It has to do with power. And I want to draw to a conclusion. I don't know how much time you've actually given me to keep going. Should I keep going? I'll keep going. So we have this constellation that's been talked about truth, memory, and justice, which are absolutely imperative. But at the same time, they're often talked about in a way that delinks them from power and from knowledge in the sense of discourses that I've talked about. So I think in terms of the generation of truth and the generation of a memory of an event, we can never lose sight of the fact that this is an articulation of what happened that's erasing other things. And I'll come back to that point in a moment. I want to note that there's a bit of a paradox, because even as you arrive at a truth, right, you understand the past in certain sorts of ways, the past itself is something that mobilizes violence. So one of the biggest predictors for genocide is the past, often in the way that it's been mobilized to motivate people to hate each other, for example. And this is a paradox of the memory, of the sort of discourses about memory. Anyways, I think I will move to a close. I want to note that there are other issues in terms of the focus on memory that maybe in some contexts, in some situations, forgetting is the appropriate way, and it may be culturally appropriate, at least for some people, in terms of local vernaculars and understandings. Some people say this in relationship to Cambodia to some extent. You talk to older people who are Buddhist, and they say, it's better for me to forget to let go, though there certainly is remembering of the suffering, but in terms of fixating on an issue to demand justice, that's not the preferred path. That's not for everyone, I should note, but for some people. But going back to them, what do we do? Right? So we've got this sort of paradox that we have all these mechanisms for generating truth, understanding, justice, but if these are potentially just mobilized, what are we left with at that point? So I want to leave off with a notion of ethics. And this goes back to, one thing I would say in relationship to good critical genocide prevention. Their word conviction, if you look at the etymology, is linked, viction, right, victor, to conquering. It's the notion of conquest. So when I think of conviction, right, we all think in some ways it's good to have our convictions. That's a good thing. But there are different ways. I wrote a book about actually the person at Tool Slaying who ran S21 Doik. He was a mathematician turned prison chief, torture. Somewhere between 12,000 to 20,000 people died at the site. And I sort of ruminated about what was going on with him and how to understand him. And conviction was certainly something that emerged, that he had very deeply felt convictions, even if they lacked empathy for other people. But it was the type of conviction that erases the other person. And so as I thought about this, I realized we all have our convictions, but you can have a conviction that acknowledges other people, other points of view, that doesn't erase those points of view. And there's actually an old word, it's a bit obsolete in English, called effacement. So I think of this as, as effacing conviction. And we can also have assertions and say this is what happened, an acknowledgement of the past that acknowledges other points of view, remains open to those spaces that may have been diminished or erased, that allows voices of dissent to be there, even if at times those voices of dissent may try to deny something, and there's an absolute need to combat that. But I think, to me, the most effective form of sort of memory and understanding and truth is one that has this openness. And I'll leave off there. And again, well, I'll stop there. You made the mistake of giving me too much time, I think. I apologize.
No, I just wanted to make sure you could finish your point. So thank you, Alex. And now we've got one more speaker before we turn to question and answer, if that's all right. So our host, indeed, from the Liberation War Museum and director of the Center for the Study of Genocide and Justice, recently established under the auspices of the Liberation War Museum, somebody who is known to us all in this room. And Sabrina, do you know each other too? Not yet?
Not personally, but we've been in touch before.
You've always, certainly by email and other ways. Anyway, so our last speaker is going to be Mofidul Haq.
Thanks to Gamak and Sabrina for joining us, and also the audience here, and I hope there are other people watching it in YouTube, in live streaming. I will try to be brief with the experience of Bangladesh, how Bangladesh is addressing this issue of dealing with the past for atrocity prevention in our own national context. When I was listening about transitional justice, the term which evolved in the early 90s, in the 1990s, then now this theoretical structure of dealing with the past, which is very, very interesting, with the four components: right to know, right to reparation, right to justice, and guarantee of non-recurrence. And we were thinking that in our post-conflict society after 1971 genocide, the community, the people, the state has practiced many of these components. And especially for us, in the immediate months or years of the liberation, the major issue was justice and also memory. But memory was very fresh, but there was an urge to have a kind of memorialization. So there were state-sponsored memorials for the national martyrs, mausoleum, and others. And also there was a strong feel from the community that not to forget anything. And there were many, many small memorials erected by the society. Maybe in one village, the villagers will construct something in the killing field. And we still have such memorials all over the country, especially the martyrs memorial or killing field or similar spots or of atrocities. So memorialization is a basic urge of the people. But things have changed in 1975, and then there was actually right to know was denied. There was denial of history, there was distortion of history, and the state sponsored a new version of history which they tried to impose on the society, especially on the education program and in the national media and in many different ways. But people resisted that, and it's very interesting that there were a lot of memoirs which has been written at that time. And those memoirs have created a very big impact. And those are personal memoirs, the suffering of the family or the person involved. And that memoirs become very popular with the youths. And I think that's a very interesting phenomena. And if we talk about 10 top memoirs, then you will see that maybe 5 or 6 are written by women. So somehow they could actually express the intimate feel of the historical event. And that has nothing to do with the historical analysis. I mean, it has an impact on historical analysis, but it is mostly the human story which has created the big impact. And also, there was denial of justice, denial of history, denial of justice, and then there was also, through the memorialization, memory became a power by itself, and the call for justice becoming more and more stronger in the society. And in 1990s, a People's Tribunal was established, backed by the strong social movement, a united movement, and also supported by the younger people. And the women who led this very, very popular movement for justice, they established a People's Tribunal, and she is Jahanara Imam, and she wrote a memoir actually. And that memoir made her the idol of the younger generation. So it is, memorialization has its own dynamic and own power, and we have seen this in our history, and that People's Tribunal actually laid the foundation of the formal justice procedure. So memory is very, very important for any post-conflict society or dealing with the past. You must have way to open up the memory of the people, or as many person or as many way it is possible. And we can see that the right to reparation, which is also very much involved with the justice system. Otherwise, who is going to actually do this? But in the right to reparation also, the victims, and maybe it is with our culture, they feel that if the victimization is recognized, that's the kind of reparation. And there can be also collective way, and memorials also can play a role in the fulfilling the right to reparation. And now with the formal justice system, it is now the issue is being raised that how to actually make a reparation more effective, especially for the victims of sexual violence, or for those whose property was destroyed, whose life was shattered because the earning member of the family was murdered, and then what kind of compensation can be given to them. So government has the program to provide support to the freedom fighters, to the martyrs also, but with 3 million people perished in the black hole of genocide, it's a very difficult job for the government to ensure reparation. But now a demand is being raised from the civil society that the perpetrators have accumulated enormous power and wealth over the years. So their property should be confiscated and used for reparation. So this is something, is an ongoing process, but reparation is very important, and we as a nation can feel proud that we have ensured the right to justice after a long, long struggle. And in 2010, with the establishment of the tribunal, the justice process is on, and we can feel that even with the, if you can talk with the martyrs' family, victims, you will feel the difference, that how they behaved, say, 10 years ago, how they looked into their future and what they feel today. So justice is very, very important component, and justice is not only just punishing some perpetrators, it has a big impact on the society and also on the new generation, and also play a role in uniting the nation on the basic values of humanity. And guarantee of non-recurrence is a corollary of the whole process. And the basic education that can be taken for guarantee of non-recurrence is that not only what happened or who did it in mass atrocities, but also why it happened. And if we look into that why genocide happened, then we will see that how the whole structure of this mass atrocity has been organized and how ideology has been used to engage people, to actually dehumanize a large number of people against a whole social, national, or religious group. And that is what happened in my country by using the religion, distorting the religious values, and using it to be the perpetrators of genocide. And what happened that in 1971, it was the largest killing of Muslims by the Muslims. So it just, your religion does not exempt you from being a, as Alex Hinton has said, turning a man into a monster. And how a man can become a monster, how ideology is used in manipulating the human psychology, and in a not individually but as a group, as a state principle or as a basic philosophy. These are, I think, the learning experience we have to take from if we want to ensure non-recurrence. And in my country also now, we see a new rise of violent Islam. And it is using the same ideological, theoretical framework and motivating younger generation and transforming them into most atrocious acts like the killing in the Holy Artisan Bakery in last July, even during the month of Ramadan. And so it's very important that guarantee, the guarantee of non-recurrence, it is important that you promote in the society respect for the diversity, respect for pluralism, respect for otherness of other people. And I think these are the core philosophical views which need to be promoted, and ultimate aim is actually to restructure the society on a humanistic values. And I think we all have to learn from each other's experience, and we became part of the GAMEC to promote, to tell our story and also learn from other people. And I think this forum is the beginning of our association with GAMAC in a fruitful way. I thank you all.
Well, thank you very much to our 5 speakers, 1 from Switzerland and 4 of us here today. And we've got about half an hour still for questions and discussion. And I had a very enthusiastic person in the front row. So I think Dr. Katharina Hoffmann from Germany, who was one of the speakers earlier in the conference.
Yes, thank you very much for your interesting insight and perspectives. I know that it is very complex and we can't reduce it to social justice. But I think, so I also saw the chart, but I miss the topic of social justice. And I think when we talk about the prevention of mass atrocities, the prevention of genocide, and even if we talk about the prevention of acts of terrorism, and we talk about transitional justice, gender justice, we have to talk about how, or we have to discuss how should the economic, political system change. And that is, of course, linked to the regional context, but it also concerns the global context. Perhaps
we could have a couple more points and then ask if anybody wants to respond. Yes, please. We have Trustee Tariq Ali in the front row also.
I just wanted to point out a very good coincidence between the Cambodian and our perspectives. Our friend from Cambodia was speaking about May 20th. Now, May 20th is also a very great day in the annals of our genocide, because the Chuk Nogor genocide took place on May 20th in Khulna, which is south of the country. So what I was thinking, that maybe the Tuolsleng Museum and Liberation War Museum can jointly observe this day as a joint effort day in the in fighting genocide, in fighting the anti-pluralism that affects our society. So next year we are going to get together, perhaps over a satellite conference, and observe this day together, the Tuolsleng and the Liberation War Museum. I only had to say this. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Actually, I'm very surprised to hear that we have the same day for 20th of May is very meaningful. That's why in Cambodia the government just consider of this date for the Memorials Day. And commonly for us at the museum, we have done completely different from what the government have done. I'm sorry that I mentioned about government and the museum, because we just put 3 activities on that day. We just put some information in front of the entrance of the memorial monuments that ECC established, for the victims inside of the museum. And then in the afternoon, we are linked another activity with religious. That's why, as he raised up, the religious is very important. Frankly speaking, for me, the best way that can calm the feeling of the victims down completely, is through the religious concept, because that's why we invite, for us with Buddhism, and that's why we invite the monk. And then for Bangsko, it means that to chant, and then we give the offerings to the monk. We expect that those will be reached to the dead people, in that through the museum or in Cambodian. But actually, we just that's the meaning. And then we also follow the religious concept for Buddhism. We think when we can save the merit, and also we do the charity. And that's why another part, the third activity, after we invite the monk for chanting, we brought some gift to give to the poor community. So because we believe through all of these 3 activities, we can remember or can give something back to the soul of the victims. So this is, I'm really glad. So please keep in touch, and then we are thinking together for next year, because I have done this for my museum for 2 years already. So I'm glad we can find ways to do together.
Yes, it was difficult, I think, for Visot not to be back in his institution yesterday and in these past days, because of the importance of this anniversary. But I think this leaves us some good ideas. We have some response from some other panel members. And before you do speak, I want to just say, Sabrina, we can't see you all the time. So if you want to say something, please start speaking. But please, after Hafid.
Hi, Sabrina. You would like to
I have
say
a
something
question.
first?
I have a question. Maybe it's the moment to ask it. Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
So having heard from the others and the inputs they made, etc., and thinking in a logic of what the global action against mass atrocity crimes, I mean, GAMAC, is about. My question would be to ask you. Now you just mentioned a possibility for cooperation, possibly when it comes to commemoration of a specific day, and so. But do you think it would be possible to create under the leadership of Mofidul and the colleague from Indonesia, and so who have all been previously also involved with GAMAC, a regional group that would bring an Asian vision to the third conference of GAMAC, which will take place in early 2018. Most probably in Africa. But yeah, it would be so interesting to gather some of your thoughts that are also specific to your region and your realities in a way. Maybe also including some others that are not present today in Dhaka. But this is just a question of mine. I mean, that comes up from your contributions and interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Yes, definitely that Indonesia is more than happy to be a part of this regional and global cooperation with GAMAC. So ASEAN is now moving into a single community of nations, economically, politically, socially, and culturally. But we are not yet the same community with EU because we are very diversified. So thank you so much, Sabrina. And let me come back to Madam Katrina for your insights related with the modality to prevent mass atrocity and genocide, when we cannot do anything without the change of conducive environment that will support this movement. Indonesia could be a good or relevant example. We can recover, we can change, you see, we can address our dark past because we totally change our political, legal, and economic environment. So this is really a new Indonesia. We amended our constitution 4 times. Yeah. We transformed our system from authoritarian to democracy. So that's not an easy task. So to readjust with this new condition, it's not easy. But it's provide environment for Aceh, for Papua, for other islands not to separate from Indonesia because we provide them what they expected. So luckily that in early 2004, despite in 1998, our economic growth was minus 16%, but in early 2004, we fully recover. The situation is fully the same prior to the crisis. But the second approach made by Indonesia is to make reform all sectors of development. We reform because of the implication of amendment of our constitution. And the last key word is to promote reconciliation, because we have many social tensions, not only in Aceh, we have in Central Sulawesi, we have in Maluku, because we have about 18,000 islands. So that's a very challenging time, but probably Indonesian experience could be a relevant lesson learned for others. to address their internal social tension, and Indonesia could be a relevant lesson learned. Thank you.
Well, taking cue from Sabrina, we are thinking about the new museum, the space, the platform we have created can be a hub in the region. And we try to establish contact with regional countries and also with the ASEAN. I think this conference has opened that new possibility, and we already have good contacts with the museums in Korea, the May 18 Foundation Museum against the armed dictatorship. Then also Jewel Sling Museum, we have a long contract with them. We have in India, Sabarmati Gandhi Ashram, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal. And the Center for the Study of Genocide and Justice organizes Winter School, a residential 8-day intensive program for the youths. And this year we had participants from Nepal, from Sri Lanka, and we hope that, that was last year, but this year we hope we can have, and also Cambodia, we have participants from 3 countries. And we think that Liberation War Museum can be a platform for the youth of the Asia to come together, to celebrate, to share their history and look for commonality. And I think it is very essential to promote such things, and I hope with GAMAC contacts this can also be promoted, and we look forward actually that Liberation War Museum in Bangladesh, let it become a center for peace, center for promoting pluralism, diversity, and secular liberal philosophy, which must include also a just society where an inclusive society where large number of people will not be denied of the basic opportunities of life. So we really appreciate the idea that has been floated in this forum, and we will look forward for a new development. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the floor? Yes, at the back.
Thank you. I'm coming from Southeast University. I'm Nalopa. My question is for Muxidullah Mustar and all the justice and our friends who has come from abroad. From the very beginning of our history, there is a purpose, is religious purpose. From till now, we say that from the Red Leaf issue, from the Liberation War issue, and in 1971, our ladies facing raped for also a religious purpose, and there was a word Malwan that already said the last day in conversation of our chairperson. Now, I want to ask our chairpersons that what the solution? Till now, our Hinduism, Buddhism also suffering today, and we have no solution from to it. And also, the Jamaat Islamic issue, what the outlook of from abroad, what the solution we can get, when our these issues will be end, the Hinduism, Muslimism, or how when our Hinduist person, who is our friend, our family person, when they are suffering from these religious purpose issues.
Thank you. Can we just have, that's raised a question I think that we've all been actually talking around too. It's a question of, as we were discussing, pluralism and non-secular and secular views that can be expressed. But I actually, because of the time, I can see it's going to run out, but there was another speaker. Can we ask for one more and then see if people want to reply? Otherwise, we're going to run out. I think we've got two more hands up, actually. One at the back there. Yes. Yes, you, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible? Right. So my question is to Professor Hinton. I really like your idea of thinking about genocide prevention as a concept critically, and I do appreciate the idea. If I dare say, it was eye-opening. But my question is, how does this new perspective of looking at things and realizing that some things are hidden as soon as you express something else, how do you translate this into action in terms of educating the newer generation or actively preventing, participating in genocide prevention activities? How does your critical genocide prevention work in action?
Hello, I have got an opinion about how to prevent mass atrocities or genocide, because I believe that there is something called a subconscious of a nation. The thing Bangladesh has dealt with, the tradition of impunity, has somehow affected our legal processes somehow, and it is still going on today. Look at what is going in our hill tracts, that we are doing atrocities against specific ethnic groups. So I think if we have really learned from our past that our great losses, our sufferings, we would not have turned into the beasts that have once slaughtered us. So prevention of genocide, one step should be making the people realize their own losses so that they can never repeat what was once done to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I think Alex Hinton had a comment.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. It's a very good one. The answer was not clear. It was, I think, implicit in what I was saying, and it also spoke to the presentation I gave yesterday. Hard to believe, yesterday. It seems like a long time ago. But the sort of very quick answer, and I'll elaborate a bit, is critical thinking, right? I mean, that's sort of the answer. How can you have effective action if you're acting blindly, right? So a critical perspective is one that unpacks assumptions to enable you to see things differently. And as I provided the example of the map, the example of the use of R2P, I can give you many more examples. Those are small ones that speak to the point that if you use discernment, the notion of critique, and your desire is to be an activist, for example, critical thinking of this sort will enable you to act much more effectively. I should step back and also add that beyond activism, the argument, as well that I presented yesterday about the banality of everyday thought, is that, in fact, this process of articulation and redaction is something that we use all the time, right? It's all around us. And in our own lives, as we move through them, we need to think critically about what's going on, about our culpability, and perhaps your comment is about this as well, right? Because we're all sort of blinded, and critical thought helps us to try and acknowledge other people who we might otherwise reduce, caricature, stereotype, and to be open to other perspectives, other ways of thinking, and also to the sorts of erasures, including the one you mentioned, which is the erasure of genocide that takes place, or as Professor Nandi said, the invisible genocides, right? So there are many ways in which I would advocate critical thinking. The problem is people sometimes talk about critical thinking, and there's not really a methodology to it. It's kind of an empty talk, but I think there's a very specific way I've tried to talk about it that can be employed to enhance activism as well as general thought in the world, and that key ethics of openness, the ethics of effacement. as opposed to effacing conviction that erases the face of the other, that's at the heart of genocide as well.
The question raised about in Bangladesh society, how we divided the community and also marginalized a group as Hindus or Buddhists, and also the majority and attitude is changing and sometimes branding them in a very particular way, in a very derogatory way. These are the reality of today, but not the reality of the life, or as you mentioned, the subconscious level of the nation. This nation fought for certain values. And one of the fundamental slogan in our liberation war, and there is a poster also which was published, that the Hindus of Bengal, the Muslims of Bengal, the Christians of Bengal, the Buddhists of Bengal, we are all Bengali, we are all Bengali. So these are the values for which people have laid down their life. And nobody count that how many of them are Muslims and how many of them are Hindus. And these fundamental values remain deeply rooted in our psyche. And also we think that it became also intergenerational, the younger generation also. But there are forces of evil, which try to distort the social mindset and pollute the mind of the younger generation or the people in many different ways. So this is an ongoing battle, and one must carry on this struggle, but he or she can find great inspiration from the spirit of liberation, from the values for which we fought for our freedom. And I think this is important aspects, and also it is very important that when we talk about dealing with the past and atrocity prevention, we also have to look into how our state structure is also behaving, and that's also very important, how the vested property right, or the right of the minority for equal right on property, how it has been distorted for long years, not yet been properly rectified. What is happening in the hill tracts is also the core issue, is the land issue. And it has become very complicated, but this also needs to be solved. And what is important is that you have to solve it in a peaceful way. And the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, when she signed the peace accord, maybe not, in the development is not as it was expected, but that's the only way, and that is how we negotiate, we fight, we struggle, and we try to create a society of peace and harmony. And also, when we look into the region, Nepal has also had a very traumatic past. The civil war, which has destroyed the social fabric, and also need to be addressed properly. In Sri Lanka, the peace has prevailed in Sri Lanka, but not much progress has been made in terms of peace building and nation building. In Myanmar, the Rohingya issue is becoming a very complicated issue, and Bangladesh is hosting the refugees for long years. So it is not only what is happening in our country and our society, what is happening in the region, what is happening globally. So really we need a global action against mass atrocity crime, and learn from the experience of what GAMAC can offer and what other countries can offer. And I think that's very important, to carry on the struggle for peace and harmony, for a plural society, for a society where everybody will have the opportunity to build up their life in their own way.
Thank you. I think Hafid had something to say also.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very insightful question, that how to promote tolerance, peace, and respect each other. Well, probably there are a few points that I could share One is this important to strengthen our democratic institution. And World Liberation Museum over here, as Mafidul Haq mentioned so far, that it could be a center for peace study, human rights center study. So amazing. So we need to develop, you see, center of, well, to strengthen democratic institution. 2 days ago, I visited Islamic University Technology, not far from Dhaka, and I found that more than 40 nations study there. That you can also put there one human rights research center to promote tolerance. It could be also the benefit not only for Bangladesh, but for the region, or maybe for the world, especially for Islamic world. So Bangladesh could be the pioneer on promoting this tolerance and plurality. And secondly, this is also important to harmonize our domestic legislation to meet international standards. So it's also very challenging. So, and the third one is a promotion, the issue for integrating, you see, pluralism issue, tolerance issue, into all level of education, primary, secondary, and university levels. So, well, to build a culture of tolerance. And the very last, I think, we need to also address the issue of marginalized people, the most disadvantaged people. As Mafidul Haq mentions that Bangladesh hosted Rohingya refugees. We need to address the issue of poverty, the poorest of the poor, street children, unemployment, elderly, and so on and so on. I think all this agenda could be, well, a starting point to strengthen the spirit of brotherhood, the spirit of oneness in our nation and across the nation or across the region. So that's my point in reflecting with this question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think questioners have raised some interesting points. I think before we close, we might turn once again to Sabrina and see if she has some concluding remarks from her end.
Thank you, Helen. No concluding remarks on my end, just a big thank you, because I think it was a very enriching conversation, and as I said, we're so proud to have the Liberation War Museum on board, and excited and looking forward what can come out of this partnership in the coming weeks, months, and years. So thank you for taking GAMAC into your agenda of this conference. And we see it as a starting point for an important and fruitful cooperation with some of the people present being real leaders in the Asian region when it comes to the topic. And we have so much to learn from you and from that region, and I think it would be it may be really able to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll draw things to a close. Thanks to everybody for participating, and to anyone who was watching through the remote facilities of the internet, which makes so many new things possible for us. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon.